There's a hill in Ireland that has been keeping a secret for 5,000 years. Not a metaphorical secret, not a poetic one. A real secret, encoded in stone and bone and human DNA. That when scientists finally cracked it open in 2020, produced one of the most disturbing findings in the entire history of European archaeology. The headline that broke across the world was clinical, measured, academic. The reality behind it was something else entirely. Inside the most sacred chamber of Ireland's most ancient monument, buried in the most elaborately decorated recess, in a tomb older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than anything most people associate with the word civilization, scientists found a man whose parents were brother and sister. And that was only the beginning of what the stone had been hiding. Before we go inside that tomb, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Because the monument at the center of this story is not some obscure ruin that only specialists know about. Newgrange, in the Boyne Valley of County Meath, about 30 miles north of Dublin, is one of the most remarkable structures human beings have ever built. It was constructed around 3200 BC by people who had no metal tools, no writing, no wheels, and no engineering tradition that anyone has been able to trace to an outside source. They built it from scratch, from pure Neolithic ingenuity, and what they built has outlasted almost everything else humanity has produced. The mound itself covers more than an acre of ground. It is kidney-shaped, roughly 85 meters across and 13 meters high, containing an estimated 200,000 tons of material, stone, soil, and river-rolled quartz, all placed by human hands without any mechanical assistance. The exterior is faced with white quartz that would have made it visible from miles away in any direction, gleaming in the Irish sun like something dropped from another world onto the green hills of the Boyne Valley. Around its base, 97 massive curbstones are arranged in a precise circle, many of them covered in carved symbols, spirals, lozenges, concentric circles, zigzag patterns, executed with a precision and consistency that took generations of skilled craftspeople to produce. The entrance stone alone, curbstone 1, is considered one of the finest examples of prehistoric art in all of Europe. Its triple spiral motif carved so deeply and so exactly into the grey stone that it has survived 5,000 years of Irish weather without losing a line. But the engineering achievement that has astonished researchers more than anything else, the feature T, hat, makes Newgrange not just impressive but genuinely mysterious, is the passage. Running 19 meters from the entrance into the heart of the mound, it leads to a cruciform chamber with 3 recesses and a corbelled roof that rises 6 meters above the floor. 5,000 years of Irish rain have fallen on the hill above. This chamber. The roof has not leaked once, not once in 5,000 years. The Neolithic builders who constructed this chamber understood water management, stone engineering, and structural physics at a level that modern architects who have studied the site describe with unconcealed admiration. Something just happened that the American government does not want you to spend too much time thinking about. Not because it's complicated, but because once you understand it fully, once you see the whole picture, you realize that everything they've been telling you about the Middle East, about nuclear weapons, about who controls what and who answers to whom, almost none of it is true. And the proof isn't buried in some classified file. It's hiding in plain sight in the actions of 3 governments who have been playing a game so sophisticated, so layered, so deliberately confusing, that most people never even realize the game is being played at all. Here is what we know. Russia has been moving nuclear material. Not openly, not through the kind of official channels that the IAEA monitors and the United Nations debates. Quietly, systematically, in a way that was designed from the beginning to be deniable. And the destination, or at least one of the destinates, ION's most analysts are now pointing to, is Iran. A country the United States just spent billions of dollars trying to strip of its nuclear capabilities. A country the US bombed not once, but twice in the span of a single year. A country whose supreme leader was killed in those strikes and whose entire nuclear infrastructure was supposed to have been, as Donald Trump himself put it, completely and totally obliterated. Except it wasn't. And Russia may be a very large reason why. Let's go back to June 2025 because that is where this story truly explodes into the open. The United States and Israel had just carried out a massive coordinated strike on 3 of Iran's most critical and Isfahan. More than 125 aircraft were involved. 14 GBU-57 bunker buster bombs were dropped. The White House called it a spectacular military success. Trump declared Iran's nuclear program dead. And then, within hours of those strikes, Dmitry Medvedev, the man who is effectively Vladimir Putin's most aggressive public voice, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, posted something on Telegram that made governments around the world go completely silent for a moment. He said, and these are his exact words, that the enrichment of nuclear material, and no W, we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons, will continue. And then he said something that detonated like a second bomb. He said a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. Read that again. Not nuclear technology, not nuclear knowledge, not the kind of vague assistance that governments have been quietly providing for decades. Nuclear warheads, ready to supply, directly. Trump saw it. He responded, dead almost immediately on Truth Social, asking whether he had correctly heard Medvedev casually throwing around the N-word, meaning nuclear, and saying that he and other countries would supply nuclear warheads to Iran. Trump said, if he did say that, and if confirmed, let me know immediately. The N-word should not be treated so casually. Now, what's fascinating about that response isn't the outrage, it's the uncertainty. The most powerful man in the world, commanding the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth, responding to a public social media post with what amounted to, is this real? Did that just happen? And D, that uncertainty, that momentary panic at the top of the American government, tells you everything about what was actually going on beneath the surface. Because here is what Trump and his advisors knew, and what they were desperately trying to figure out in the hours after those statements. Medvedev was not making a threat. He was mocking, doing an announcement. There is a difference. A threat is forward-looking, conditional, designed to change behavior. What Medvedev said was retrospective, declarative, almost casual in its confidence. He wasn't saying, if why, how do this, we will do that. He was saying, this is already the trajectory. This is already in motion. And countries, plural, are already positioned to make it happen. The question Washington could not answer was how much of this was already done. The manifest said manhole covers. The captain knew they were not manhole covers. And the question nobody asked loudly enough for 17 months is the question that a Spanish investigation has now answered in terms that should stop every serious analyst of nuclear proliferation cold D. Where exactly was a Russian state-owned heavy-lift cargo vessel carrying 2 submarine nuclear reactors actually going when it suffered a series of explosio and sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea 60 miles off the coast of Spain on December 23, 2024? The official shipping papers said Vladivostok. The route the ship was sailing made Vladivostok a geographic absurdity. The captain, when Spanish investigators finally pressed him hard enough that he feared more for his safety staying silent than for his safety speaking, to hold them the truth. The cargo was going to Rizun, a port on the northeastern coast of North Korea that sits so ost see one country from the other. A port whose infrastructure was not capable of unloading objects of the weight and dimensions of nuclear reactor housings, which is precisely why the Ursa Major was also carrying 2 special Liebherr cranes, the specific equipment you bring when you need to unload something at a port that cannot handle it on its own. And now, on May 13th, 2026, 17 months after the ship went down and 2 of its crew members died in those explosions. The full picture of what was on that vessel, where it was going, what it was, S4, and what may have stopped it from getting there has been assembled into an account that describes one of the most consequential covert operations in the history of nuclear nonproliferation. Russia was paying a debt. North Korea had sent soldiers to die in Ukraine. The payment was a nuclear submarine program, and something, or someone, decided the payment could not be allowed to arrive. Let me set the complete picture of what the Ursa Major actually was before the night of December 23, 2024, because understanding the VSSL's history explains why it was chosen for this specific mission and why its cargo was disguised the way it was. The ship was built in Germany in 2009 as the E-Scan Britannia, a heavy lift cargo vessel with 2 powerful cranes mounted on its port side, designed specifically to move extremely heavy and oversized cargoes. That conventional shipping infrastructure cannot handle. It was renamed multiple times across its operational life, becoming the Hyundai Britannia, then EIT Palmina, then Sparta Three, and finally Ursa Major in 2021. By the time it received its final name, it was owned and operated by Oberon Logistica, a Russian state corporation that handles marine military logistics. The company's name translates directly as Defense Logistics. This W is not a neutral commercial shipping operation. It was an instrument of the Russian Ministry of Defense as supply chain. The Ursa Major had spent years running what analysts called Russia's Syrian Express, the logistics route that supplied the Russian military's operations at the Tartus naval base in Syria, evacuating Russian military EQ, UIP when circumstances required it. This was a ship that knew how to move sensitive military cargo under commercial cover. It had been doing exactly that for years, and in December 2024, it was doing it again, on a mission whose stakes were categorically different from anything it had carried before. The departure sequence tells the first part of the story, and it tells it in the specific language of operational concealment that investigators trained to read these patterns can decode from the public RIO, cord. On December 2nd, 2024, the Ursa Major docked at the Russian port of Ust-Luga in the Gulf of Finland, a fuel and industrial port that serves as a primary loading point for Russian military logistics vessels. It then moved to a container terminal in St. Petersburg. The public shipping manifest recorded the cargo as 2 large manhole covers, 129 empty shipping containers, and 2 large Liebherr cranes. The declared destination was Vladivostok, Russia's major Pacific port, located on the country's eastern coast. The ship departed St. Petersburg on December 11th. Now consider the route that declaration implied. A vessel leaving St. Petersburg bound for Vladivostok would travel west through the Baltic Sea, south through the English Channel, through the Strait of Gibraltar, across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, Ross, the Indian Ocean, and then north through the Pacific to Vladivostok. That route takes a vessel carrying Russian port cranes and empty containers through some of the most heavily monitored waters in the world, past the shores of NATO allies, through a choke point Contro, Iliad by Egypt, and across an ocean, before arriving at a destination that could have been reached far more directly and far more cheaply by rail across. It's Russia itself. The Trans-Siberian Railway connects St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. Cranes and empty containers can travel by train. The decision to ship them by sea along a route that passes through the Mediterranean requires an explanation that empty containers and port cranes cannot provide. Nuclear reactor housings being delivered to a port on the North Korean coast can. The specific cargo that investigators identified when they examined the loading footage and the physical evidence from the sinking was the VM-4SG nuclear reactor housing. Understanding what the VM-4SG is and what it does is essential for understanding why its transfer to North Korea represented something that analysts described as one of the most significant potential nuclear proliferation events in recent decades. The VM-4SG is a naval nuclear reactor, originally developed during the Soviet era for use in strategic nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, Specificas, like the Delta IV class. Delta IV submarines are SSBNs, nuclear-powered vessels carrying submarine-launched ballistic missiles, the kind of platform that sits at the core of a nuclear deterrent because it can hide beneath the ocean's surface for extended periods while remaining capable of launching nuclear warheads at targets thousands of kilometers away. The reactor that powers them is not an energy system in the civilian sense. It is the propulsion heart of one of the most strategically consequential weapons platforms ever built. The VM-4SG remains in service aboard several Russian Navy Delta IV submarines today. Investigators examining the photag of the Ursa Major's loading operations in Ust-Luga and the dimensions of the objects being placed in the ship's hold estimated the 2 large items at approximately 65 tons each. Standard MA and hull covers do not weigh 65 tons. VM-4SG nuclear reactor housings do, and the video footage showed containers being loaded into the hold with a deliberate gap left beneath the structures, later identified as those housings, a loading configuration that makes no sense for inert port equipment and considerable sense for objects requiring specific structural support and spacing. Out yet. The intelligence assessment published on May 13, 2026, citing CIA classified findings from earlier this month drawn from satellite imagery and multiple surveillance collection streams, does not describe a military campaign that degraded Iranian missile capacity. It describes a military campaign that collapsed tunnel entrances while the missiles inside remained intact, the LANU. Shares survived untouched, and the engineering units that Iran specifically designed and trained for exactly this scenario arrived within days with bulldozers and front-end loaders and dump trucks and dug them back out again. 90% of Iran's underground missile storage and launch facilities nationwide are now assessed as partial, or fully operational. The Trump administration told Americans the Iranian military was decimated and rendered combat ineffective for years to come. U.S. intelligence agencies are telling policymakers something that has no overlap with that description. And the gap between what was said publicly and what the classified assessments actually show is not a gap of emphasis or framing. It is a gap between the narrative and the operational reality that the satellite imagery is documenting in real time. Let me set what the classified intelligence picture actually describes with the precision that its strategic implications demand, because the specific language of the assessment matters enormously for understanding not just what happened, but what happens next in a conflict that is still unresolved and still active. The New York Times report, sourced to multiple people with knowledge of assessments from earlier this month, states that Iran has regained access to roughly 90% of its underground missile storage and launch facilities nationwide, which are now assessed to be partially or fully operational. But the detail that most directly threatens American naval forces in the Strait of Hormuz is not the nationwide figure. It is the Hormuz-specific breakdown. Iran has restored operational access to 30 of the 33 missile sites it maintains along the strait. Sites capable. There are places on this earth that science simply cannot explain. Places so strange, so impossible, so utterly defiant of every law of nature that even the greatest scientists and researchers in the world have sat together for decades trying to make sense of them and still walked away with more questions than answers. You have heard about the Bermuda Triangle. You have heard about underwater rivers. But today we're going to take you somewhere far beyond those familiar mysteries. Today, we're going to show you 7 places on this planet that should not exist, and yet they do. Welcome to World Unveiled. Let us begin. We start our journey in the heart of one of the most brutal deserts on Earth, deep inside the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan. A place where the heat alone is enough to break a man. There's a hole in the ground that has been on fire for over 50 years. Not a small fire, not a campfire. A massive, roaring, endless inferno stretching across 17,500 square feet of open earth, burning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, through rain, through storms, through freezing winter nights and scorching summer days. It never stops. It never dims. It simply burns. This terrifying pit is known as the Door to Hell, and its story begins in 1971, when a Soviet geological team arrived in this remote corner of the desert to drill for oil. As they worked, the ground beneath their equipment suddenly gave way and collapsed, swallowing their drilling rig whole and opening up a massive crater in the earth. Almost immediately, a strange and deeply unpleasant smell began rising from the hole. When scientists investigated, they discovered that the collapsed ground had punctured a massive underground reservoir of natural methane gas, which was now venting freely into the atmosphere. Methane is an extraordinarily dangerous gas, invisible, odorless in its pure form, and highly explosive. The decision was made to ignite the escaping gas, believing it would burn off within a matter of weeks. That was over 50 years ago. The gas never ran out. The fire never died. And to this day, the Door to Hell burns on, a roaring monument to the hidden power sleeping beneath our feet, and a reminder that this earth holds far more secrets underground than we have ever discovered above it. From the burning deserts of Central Asia, our journey takes us across the ocean to the border region, where Brazil, Venezuela, and Guyana meet. And here, rising impossibly above the surrounding jungle like something from another world entirely, stands Mount Roraima. At 2,810 meters tall, Mount Roraima is not the highest mountain in the region, but it is without any question the strangest. While every other mountain on Earth tapers to a peak or a ridge at its summit, Mount Roraima does something that seems to violate every principle of natural geology. Its top is completely flat, an enormous, perfectly level plateau stretching across the very top of the mountain, permanently surrounded by clouds, perpetually shrouded in mist, sitting so high above the jungle below that it feels less like a part of the earth and more like a separate world floating somewhere between the ground and the sky. According to National Geographic researchers, Mount Roraima is over 2 billion years old, making it one of the oldest geological formations anywhere on the planet. For millions upon millions of years, no human being ever set foot on its summit. It was completely isolated from the rest of the world, its top hidden in clouds, its walls too steep and too sheer for any climber to scale. It was not until 1884 that a human being first successfully reached the summit, and when they did, what they found up there stunned the scientific world completely. The flat top of Mount Roraima is not barren rock. It is teeming with life, but life unlike anything found anywhere else on Earth. Researchers discovered animal and plant species on its summit that had never been seen before anywhere in the world. Of all the species found on Mount Roraima, 53% exist nowhere else on this planet. Not in the jungle below, not in any other mountain range, not in any laboratory or nature reserve. Only here, on this impossible flat-topped mountain, floating in the clouds above South America, has this life ever been found. Mount Roraima did not just evolve in isolation, it evolved into an entirely different world. Leaving South America behind, our journey now takes us to the waters between India and Sri Lanka. And here, visible even from NASA satellites orbiting hundreds of miles above the Earth, is one of the most controversial and mysterious structures ever discovered on our planet. A bridge, a partially submerged bridge stretching 30 kilometers across the shallow waters of the Pak Strait, connecting the Indian mainland to the island of Sri Lanka. Local people have known about this bridge for thousands of years, and according to Hindu tradition, it was built by the god Lord Rama himself, using stones that could float on water. And remarkably, floating stones matching this exact description are still found in this area to this day. When scientists finally investigated this structure seriously, they made a discovery that left the entire research community speechless. Using radiocarbon dating, the most reliable method available for determining the age of ancient materials, They tested both the stones that form the bridge and the sandbar on which those stones rest. The results were extraordinary and deeply puzzling. The sandbar itself, the natural foundation beneath the bridge, was found to be approximately 4,000 years old. But the stones placed on top of it, the stones that form the actual bridge structure, were found to be 7,000 years old, 3,000 years older than the ground they are sitting on, which means these stones existed somewhere else. 3,000 years before anyone placed them in this location, they were brought here, deliberately, by someone or something. The question of who built this bridge, how those ancient stones were transported here, and why they are thousands of years older than their foundation remains one of the deepest unsolved mysteries in the entire field of archaeology. Our journey continues to the vast plains of Tanzania and East Africa, where inside the Goru-Ankole conservation area there exists something that should be completely and utterly impossible according to everything we understand about the physical world. A moving mountain. Every single year, this extraordinary geologic owl formation shifts its position by up to 6 feet, moving across the landscape slowly but consistently, changing its location year after year, decade after decade, century after century. Scientists have confirmed that this mountain has been moving continuously for at least 3 million years. 3 million years of constant, steady, unstoppable movement across the African plains. The story gets even stranger. If you take even a small handful of sand from this mountain and bring it home with you, that sand will continue to move on its own, behaving as if it still wants to follow its source. This phenomenon was confirmed publicly by Tanzania's own former president, Jakaya Kikwete, at a press conference, giving this impossible mountain the highest possible level of official verification. Scientists believe the mountain's sand originated from an active volcano and possesses magnetic properties that cause it to behave like a massive natural magnet. Particles clinging together rather than dispersing, the entire mass slowly drawn across the landscape by forces we do not yet fully understand. But why it moves in the specific direction it does, what determines its path, and what will eventually stop it? These questions remain completely unanswered. Sailing out into the open ocean, our next destination is the meeting point between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And here, in the open water, where these two vast bodies of ocean converge, something happens that seems to defy the most basic laws of nature. They do not mix. Two oceans, covering together the majority of the Earth's surface, meeting in the open sea with nothing between them, no wall, no barrier, no boundary of any kind. And yet their waters remain completely and perfectly separated, as distinctly divided as if a sheet of glass ran between them for thousands of miles. The line where they meet is clearly visible, a vivid, dramatic boundary between waters of different colors, different textures, different densities. The reason for this phenomenon lies in the fundamental differences between the two bodies of water. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans have different levels of salinity, different amounts of salt dissolved in their water. They have different temperatures. They have different chemical compositions, built up over millions of years of separate geological history. Since saltier water is denser and heavier than fresher water, the two bodies of water naturally stratify rather than blend. Each maintaining its own distinct layer, its own character, its own identity, the boundary between them is not a permanent fixed line but a dynamic living barrier, maintained by the constant interplay of these physical and chemical differences. And despite the constant action of waves and currents working to blur this line, the oceans maintain their separation side by side, world without end. Deep in the green mountains of the Indonesian island of Flores, hidden within the Kelimutu National Park, lie 3 lakes that sit side by side on the same volcanic mountain. And these 3 lakes do something that no scientific model has ever fully explained. They change color, not gradually, not in a predictable pattern. Sometimes, as many as 6 times in a single year, these lakes shift through their colors. Black, deep red, turquoise, white, blue, brown, green, each lake changing independently of the others, so that the 3 sitting together almost never display the same color at the same time. Throughout all of recorded history, no one has ever seen all 3 Kelimutu lakes displaying the same color simultaneously. Park officials confirm that active volcanoes lie beneath all 3 lakes, and that volcanic gases rising through the water trigger chemical reactions that alter the water's color. But why the 3 lakes, fed by the same volcanic source sitting within meters of each other, consistently produce different colors at the same time, and why their color changes follow no predictable schedule or pattern, remains a mystery that science has not yet solved. Our final destination brings us back to Asia, to the northeastern Indian state of Manipur, where a freshwater lake called Loktak Lake contains something found nowhere else on the surface of this earth, a floating national park. Loktak Lake is home to thousands of floating islands, large masses of vegetation, soil, and biomass that drift permanently on the surface of the water. never sinking, never anchoring to the bottom, simply floating freely across the lake in response to wind and current. These floating islands, known locally as pumdis, range in size from small patches of vegetation to islands large enough to support permanent human settlements, schools, and entire communities of people who live their entire lives floating on water, feeling the gentle, constant movement of their island beneath them every moment of every day. But the most astonishing discovery connected to Loktak Lake came when researchers realized that one of the world's most endangered deer species, the Sangai deer, a creature so rare that scientists had believed it was extinct, had survived, hidden and protected on these floating islands. While the rest of the world had written the Sangai off as gone forever, a small population had been quietly living on Loktak's floating islands, isolated from the threats that had wiped out their kind everywhere else. The world's only floating national park had become the last refuge of a species the world had given up on. This Earth is still hiding its greatest secrets, and World Unveiled will keep finding them for you. Like this video, share it, and drop a comment telling us which of these 7 impossible places shocked you the most. We will see you in the next incredible video. There's a hill in Ireland that has been keeping a secret for 5,000 years. Not a metaphorical secret, not a poetic one, a real secret, encoded in stone and bone and human DNA. That when scientists finally cracked it open in 2020, produced one of the most disturbing findings in the entire history of European archaeology. The headline that broke across the world was clinical, measured, academic. The reality behind it was something else entirely. Inside the most sacred chamber of Ireland's most ancient monument, buried in the most elaborately decorated recess, in a tomb older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than anything most people associate with the word civilization, scientists found a man whose parents were brother and sister. And that was only the beginning of what the stone had been hiding. Before we go inside that tomb, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Because the monument at the center of this story is not some obscure ruin that only specialists know about. Newgrange, in the Boyne Valley of County Meath, about 30 miles north of Dublin, is one of the most remarkable structures human beings have ever built. It was constructed around 3200 BC by people who had no metal tools, no writing, no wheels, and no engineering tradition that anyone has been able to trace to an outside source. They built it from scratch, from pure Neolithic ingenuity, and what they built has outlasted almost everything else humanity has produced. The mound itself covers more than an acre of ground. It is kidney-shaped, roughly 85 meters across and 13 meters high, containing an estimated 200,000 tons of material, stone, soil, and river-rolled quartz, all placed by human hands without any mechanical assistance. The exterior is faced with white quartz that would have made it visible from miles away in any direction, gleaming in the Irish sun like something dropped from another world onto the green hills of the Boyne Valley. Around its base, 97 massive curbstones are arranged in a precise circle, many of them covered in carved symbols, spirals, lozenges, concentric circles, zigzag patterns, executed with a precision and consistency that took generations of skilled craftspeople to produce. The entrance stone alone, curbstone 1, is considered one of the finest examples of prehistoric art in all of Europe. Its triple spiral motif, carved so deeply and so exactly into the grey stone that it has survived 5,000 years of Irish weather without losing a line. But the engineering achievement that has astonished researchers more than anything else, the feature T, hat, makes Newgrange not just impressive, but genuinely mysterious, is the passage. Running 19 meters from the entrance into the heart of the mound, it leads to a cruciform chamber with 3 recesses and a corbelled roof that rises 6 meters above the floor. 5,000 years of Irish rain have fallen on the hill above. This chamber. The roof has not leaked once, not once in 5,000 years. The Neolithic builders Guho constructed this chamber understood water management, stone engineering, and structural physics at a level that modern architects who have studied the site describe with unconcealed admiration.